How are the United States trying to reclaim degraded lands? Of course, first of all, there are some pretty effective efforts to make farming easier on the soil, since it's the main reason land turns into something barren. This is a perfect solution. Controlled grazing's being introduced, which can also help bring back areas that have been seriously damaged by human activity to the point where growing anything is nearly impossible. And then there are beavers. If you think all they do is gnaw on trees and build dams, well, you're right. But the thing is, all of that does a ton of good for nature and helps bring back what humans once destroyed. They brought a small bunch of beavers to a river in Arizona, a dry and desert-like place that had been damaged back when European settlers arrived, and what happened next was nothing short of amazing. What exactly did they do? Let's find out. If we could travel back in time, end up on the North American continent, and then look around, we'd definitely see beavers everywhere. They used to be all over the place, from Alaska to the Gulf of Mexico. They chewed on trees, built their dams, but they just had bad luck of having valuable fur and castoreum. Just so you know, that's an oily substance found in special glands located near the animal's tail. Like in so many other stories about American wildlife, at some point, European settlers arrived on the continent and started actively hunting the animals in the early 1600s. People back then claimed that in New Netherland, a colony on the east coast of the continent, about 80,000 beavers were killed every year for at least 9 years. Besides that, there's evidence showing that in Connecticut and Massachusetts, more than 10,000 beavers were trapped each year between 1620 and 1630. Here's another fact that shows the scale of the beaver wipeout by colonists. Starting in 1670, the Hudson's Bay Company sent 2 or 3 trade ships to the bay each year to ship furs from Canada to England. So basically, people hunted a lot and wiped out every beaver they saw just for their own gain. Then it turned out that beavers were getting hard to find on the East Coast, so the colonists started moving west. It's worth saying here that it was actually the hunt for animal fur, including beavers, that led to the full-scale discovery of the western lands. Many people think it was the gold rush that caused it, but in fact it was the fur rush of the 19th century that not only led to the exploration of the West, but also had serious consequences for the local wildlife. Hunters wiped out everything in their path for fur and profit, and as a result, in the span of about 30 years from 1806 to 1838, almost all the beavers from Missouri to California and from Canada to Mexico were wiped out. They were nearly driven to extinction. One of the victims of the beaver hunt was the San Pedro River, located in the northern part of the Sonoran Desert. This is in what's now the state of Arizona. Both the state and almost the entire river are situated in arid areas where there's limited rainfall, high temperatures are common, and the biodiversity mostly consists of flora and fauna that have managed to adapt to such harsh conditions. However, the San Pedro River used to be completely different. When there were no settlers here yet, most of the river resembled an oasis in the midst of dry lands, a winding stream with river swamps, coastal forests, meadows, and plenty of animals that made all of this their home. Of course, there were also vast beaver ponds. Then hunters showed up here. They were shocked by how many beavers there were. The animals were literally everywhere, which made the fur hunt incredibly successful, and they started calling San Pedro the Beaver River. This is Fort Huachuca, the place where the last blow to the beavers of San Pedro came from. In the 1920s, soldiers stationed there blew up dams to prevent malaria. As a result, the Beaver River lost any connection to its unofficial name. The local beavers were almost completely wiped out. Because of this, the river itself changed. It lost a bunch of green areas, and the local biodiversity, which used to brighten up the surrounding desert, seriously shrank. Plus, by the mid-20th century, the once water-rich river only flowed during the rainy season. And so it went until the late 90s. People had made peace with the consequences of the beaver extermination and just carried on until the idea emerged that maybe the river running through the barren lands could be brought back to its former state. How? By bringing back those who had been building dams here since time immemorial, the beavers. From 1999 to 2002, the first beaver settlers began arriving at San Pedro. During this time, 19 beavers were released into a stretch of the river in Cochise County. Ever wondered how you can tell that beavers are happy with their home? Dams, that's their masterpiece. No one else in nature can build such a wonder on a river. In 2006, 4 years later, researchers discovered more than 30 dams built around the area where beavers were introduced to the San Pedro River. It was definitely the right place. It's true that some of the beavers apparently weren't particularly happy with the conditions. One of them was nicknamed the surfing beaver because it drifted away somewhere tens of miles from the release site at the mouth of the Gila River. Another one migrated to the Aravaipa Canyon, which is quite a distance from where the beavers were settled. A few animals just swam or ran off to Mexico, building a few dams along the upper tributaries of the river. However, despite the runaways, the project could already be considered a success since the number of beavers was growing. In 2009, according to researchers' estimates, the population was between 30 and 120 beavers. In 2010, it was announced that the population was definitely over 100 individuals. What has all this led to? To the restoration of part of the river, which was exactly what they were trying to achieve. Look, this is a dam. It works exactly the same as what humans build. It blocks the river's flow, causing the water to start collecting, forming ponds and wetlands. As wetlands form and coastal habitats expand, aquatic plants take over new available spaces. Because of all this, the variety of insects, invertebrates, fish, mammals, and birds grows. In short, beavers are habitat builders for other creatures. It's no wonder that scientists call these fluffy engineers a keystone species, meaning they have a disproportionate impact on the environment relative to their numbers. Beavers on the San Pedro River, with a population of about 100, managed to create an environment of ponds and wetlands. This brought the waterway of Arizona's desert closer to what it was before the widespread destruction of river builders. New habitats have been settled by creatures whose populations have decreased due to the lack of suitable conditions. For example, scientists analyzed the populations of 13 bird species and concluded that in areas where beavers live, the number of individuals was 50% higher than in areas of the river without the animals. For example, this is a willow flycatcher, a bird that's endangered. Its habitat expanded just because of 100 beavers, which lowered the chance of the species disappearing. Let's add that the birds wouldn't have started settling in the new home if something wasn't right, so we can confidently conclude that, besides the increase in the bird population, the area got filled with their food, insects. Besides, it's obvious that even a small population of beavers managed to have some kind of impact on the San Pedro River's water levels. We already mentioned that the waterway that runs through the desert area is dry for most of the year. This is due to the high temperatures and lack of replenishment, all the conditions typical for this region. Even before the beaver population was reintroduced to San Pedro, a wildlife biologist from the Bureau of Land Management suggested restoring the beaver population in the watershed would help retain water during the dry season. How? Dams. Here they come again. The biologist suggested that the dams built by the beavers would hold back the water, creating ponds, which would then replenish the groundwater. In turn, this would serve as a water source for San Pedro during the dry season. This would help restore the vegetation and ecosystems that existed here before all the sad events. Judging by the fact that scientists have documented bird populations on the river that wouldn't have been here without the right conditions, the plan worked. Overall, even a small group of beavers was able to turn part of the once deserted area of the San Pedro River into the lush wetland oasis it used to be before the settlers. But unfortunately, there were problems too. Even before the number of beavers exceeded 100, the introduced population of beavers faced a disaster. In 2008, a flood came. Beavers can't build their dams out of concrete like people do, so their structures aren't as resistant to natural disasters. The result was the following. Before the flood in San Pedro, there were 30 dams, but after the flood, observers couldn't find a single one. However, the beavers loved the San Pedro River so much that a year after the disaster, the number of dams was back to 30. Then another problem came up. After understanding that the beaver settlement in the area had been a real success, population monitoring continued. The scientists were pleased with the progress until 2019, when a worrying fact was discovered. The number of beavers had decreased. That year, observers reported limited activity from the animals and the lack of any lodges or huts. This led to the conclusion that the number of animals in the area had dropped to 2 or 3. No one knows for sure what caused this negative event for the river, but researchers have suggested a few possible reasons. First, beavers could have become prey for mountain lions. Yes, that's another complication in the population recovery on the San Pedro River, since these predators are common in Arizona. However, this is probably not a major issue because beavers have been living surrounded by predators for thousands of years and somehow managed to survive. The second assumption is much more sinister. The beavers were killed by people. Unfortunately, this might be the case, and in this situation, dam builders have no chance. just like during the colonization of North America. Since 2020, monitoring has been carried out by the Watershed Management Group, and 2 years into their work, researchers found that the population had grown to 13 to 17 individuals. In other words, the beavers of San Pedro are recovering their numbers after a significant decline. At the same time, watershed management itself is helping to bring San Pedro back to the pre-extermination state. For example, here's a video from 2023, when one beaver was released into San Pedro. Then in 2024, it was found that the number of individuals in the area had decreased again and dropped to 11 to 14. Another reason was brought up: cattle. For example, cows can prevent beavers from breeding because they disturb their habitat, trampling young plants and damaging riverbanks. And this is despite the fact that the local Bureau of Land Management legally requires fences to protect the riverbank environment of the San Pedro River. However, there may be gaps in the barrier, which was discovered during a fence inspection. Despite all this, beavers are restoring their habitat on the San Pedro River. The river, located in a desert area, is really transforming even with a small population, slowly reminding us of what it was like before the beavers were wiped out in the 1800s. But there are other examples, too, of how in the States beavers are being used to change the impact of human activities. For example, beavers are working in the Chesapeake Bay, one of the most populated places in the U.S., which has suffered greatly because of humans. The reason's obvious. All human activity, including agriculture, industry, and wastewater treatment plants, all affects the bay. Agriculture means fertilizers as well as the waste products from animals like cows, chickens, pigs, and all the others raised for consumption. When it comes to industry, there are often huge emissions of various chemicals that appear in the process of production. Treatment plants also release liquids that aren't very good for the environment, and it wouldn't be so bad if each of these pollution sources dumped their waste somewhere else. For example, in a flat area far from any rivers, but that's not how things go at all. The bay has a ton of rivers flowing into it. Almost the entire surrounding area of the Chesapeake Bay is land crisscrossed by riverbeds, and near each one of them there's some kind of settlement. Some are used for farming, others have industrial plants. It's much easier to set up these things near rivers because you don't have to transport water, you can just take it right from the rivers. As for the waste, it gets dumped into the same rivers and then into the bay, endlessly polluting it. As a result, the Chesapeake Bay is now overloaded with nitrogen and phosphorus, with their levels constantly recorded at very high on the scale. Phosphorus and nitrogen promote algae blooming, which blocks the sunlight, turning huge underwater areas into dead zones where there's very little oxygen. Oxygen is the key thing required for the life of almost all underwater creatures, so without it, large underwater areas of the bay turned into wastelands. A lot is being done to fix this by restoring oyster populations. Tons of shells are dumped into the bay and its rivers with attached larvae, and this way, oyster reefs are being restored. However, it's not a cure-all, so people turn to beavers for help. In this area, they were wiped out just like on the San Pedro River, because the bay is on the east coast, which was the first to bear the brunt of European colonists. However, populations are now recovering. For example, in a small watershed in Rhode Island, the beaver population has grown from 0 to 92 over the past 30 years. So the dam builders have started coming back and repopulating the areas where they were once driven out. How can they save the bay? With more dams. In fact, this beaver creation is the key to saving the Chesapeake Bay. Thanks to them, wetlands are created, improving water quality and habitat, and the flow of water slows down, filtering out sediment. This is already pretty good, but scientists have discovered even more. Researchers knew that beaver dams trap organic, moist water, thus catching nitrates. But is there a way to also turn them into gas that would simply evaporate from the water? Turns out there is. Small ponds created by beavers don't impress much when it comes to removing nitrogen from rivers. Researchers studied them and found that such ponds remove only about 5% of nitrogen. However, they explain this by the fact that some of the beaver-created reservoirs initially filtered only forest landscapes. Larger ponds, though, are able to remove 45% of the nitrogen from the water flowing into the bay. Now that's some real help in saving the bay. Besides, remember we talked about how the ponds created by beavers are a new habitat for plants and animals? Well, they're also able to remove nitrogen and other harmful elements from the water. Beavers are the reason for double protection. There's another positive effect of beavers, as scientists point out. Their presence might encourage everyone to protect more trees, which are actively planted for the same purpose, restoring the bay. Trees are a building material source for nature's engineers. Without them, they could build a dam out of stones. But trees are a simpler and more preferred option. In short, experts have concluded that they need to restore the beaver population in the bay. The key is to address the problems that are standing in the way of this. The biggest one, as always, is people. The thing is, many locals see beavers as pests that destroy valuable trees. This leads to actions that result in the death of nature's main builders. Legislative restrictions will help here, as well as educating people about what beavers actually do. We need to show how each beaver contributes to the restoration of the Chesapeake Bay. Well, if anyone's worried about the trees, which often disappear or end up gnawed in the beaver's habitat, you can always use nets. Yeah, the usual protective stuff that stretches around the tree trunk and stops those toothy builders from chewing up the plant. There are also beaver deceivers, pipes for directing water through a dam which give river builders the impression that they're blocking the flow. However, the water still passes through, just in smaller amounts. That's it. No destruction of dams, no decrease in numbers. Everyone's happy, including the Chesapeake Bay, which will be cleaned much more effectively thanks to the heroes of today's video.